Hey, welcome back, Honors. All right, so we're going to start off your break flips with one that's recycled from last year, right around quarantine, school, and stuff like that. Squeaky baby. Just because it's already made, it's really, really solid. It's going to be a really, really good way for y'all to go ahead and get caught up. The big thing that's going to be going over, it's going to be picking up on the end of the Haitian Revolution that's going to be going on in the 1815s, or like going into the 1820s. It's going to be happening under Toussaint Louverture, and then also Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and then it's going to pick up with the Spanish liberation movements under Simón Bolivar and José de San Martín. All right, so go ahead and use this, knock this out, and then your next flip has to do with all the art and intensity and the amazing stuff I really like to talk about. So I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.
Right? Toussaint Louverture did. Even though, like I said, he's going to be captured by Napoleon, and they're going to send him to the Alps, the French Alps, and he's going to die there in prison in 1803. Well, when this occurs, these French troops are still there. So Toussaint's general and second in command, who also happens to be a terrible person, which we won't get into that right now, his name was Jean-Jacques Dessalines, right? That's Toussaint's general. And he takes over another slave revolt, and in January 1st, 1804, Haiti is going to become an independent country under the leadership of Dessalines, right? Now, also later that year in 1804, Dessalines may or may not have had about in the neighborhood of 4,000 French people that were still stuck on the island, massacred. Men, women, children, older people, it didn't matter. Now, this may or may not be true. We're not absolutely positive, but there is some pretty good documentation that points to the idea that Dessalines might have been very upset with the entire slavery institution, so much to the point that he had everyone that was left of French descent executed on the island. It's rough stuff. Now, getting into it, though, he used guerrilla warfare to help him out, to try and destroy the later French troops. But then also, these guys, the French troops, Napoleon wasn't there himself. They were actually under the command of this guy named Lacroix. And Lacroix and his armies are going to die from yellow fever particularly bad. Now, Haiti becomes the first black colony to free itself from European control, and it becomes the second colony ever to revolutionize itself from Europe, which is amazing. It went the United States, and then Haiti was next. And he became the first emperor of Haiti when he was then later assassinated because, like I said, he wasn't the nicest guy ever, so a lot of people were going to revolt. And in 1820, Haiti becomes an independent republic with democratic elections. Now, to this day, Haiti is a great example. Go ahead and jot this down, a little star somewhere. Haiti is a great example of the terrible trends that popped up after these Latin American independence movements. Haiti is a good example because following the liberation of these countries, they were rife with civil war and dispute, okay? So a lot of people were vying for control over these countries. They would pick one leader, and then they say they didn't like them, and they would try to bring in another one. And then they would pick that leader, and then they would say they didn't like them. They would try to bring in another one. So you're seeing a lot of issues with political dissension inside of these Latin American colonies, okay? So that's very, very important to understand. Got it? All right, but let's keep going forward, okay? So Jean-Jacques Dessalines creates Haiti. So that's your best early example of a Latin American independence movement, okay? So now we got to get into outside of the Caribbean, though, and now we're going to head down into the Spanish colonies. So we just talked about the French, now let's talk about the Spanish ones, right? Now, all this, again, directly caused by your boy, Napoleon. Now, do me a favor, go ahead and hit pause and put this triangle in your notes. Creoles goes here, Peninsulares goes here, Mulattoes, Mestizos go here, and slaves and natives go there, all right? Go ahead and hit pause, and I'll give you a hot second to kind of jot that down, okay? Now, welcome back, okay? Good stuff on you. Appreciate you doing that. Let's go ahead and define some of these people, though. So during the colonial period post-Columbus, right, post-1492, when the Spanish start colonizing Latin America, particularly Central and South America, they set up a social class system to keep control. Kind of like their own version of feudalism a little bit, right? Because you couldn't necessarily instate feudalism, you didn't have enough bodies or people. And also not to mention the fact that the encomienda system is going to end up killing so many natives that you had to establish some type of control or some type of government setup, right? So it looked like this. Now at the very, very top, the highest class you could be in the Latin American colonies was called a peninsulare, right? Now peninsulare means that you were born on the peninsula, right? Back in Iberia. You were normally associated with old school feudal wealth. You were usually an old school noble. And peninsulare means that you were born in Europe and you were the ruling class of the Latin American colonies. Now, Creoles, on the other hand, were born in Latin America. They were not necessarily of mixed race, and they were actually descendant of the colonial workers that were sent there. Remember when we talked about Columbus? We talked about how Columbus might not have been as bad as the people that he brought with him, right? The people that he brought with him, the colonists themselves were the really bad ones. Well, all these colonists are not noble born. Like Columbus himself was one of the people that was sent by the royals, yes. But a lot of the people that he brought with him were just regular people looking for a job and looking to try and figure out an economical way to start a new life. The descendants of those people are known as Creoles, right? They're the descendants of the original colonists, most of them born in Latin America, and they were the ones that were going to start looking around at themselves, and they're going to be like, wait, why are we letting these Spanish people tell us what to do? We've been here for several hundred years. We should have our own country all by ourselves. Now, anyway, then we got two other classes below them. Mulattas, mestizos, right? Now remember, a lot of these Creoles, their earliest ancestors, were single men, which led to a lot of racial mixing, okay? So the mulattoes, of course, as we remember from the European Exploration Unit, were African and European descendant people, and the mestizo was native and European descendant people. These are mixed cross races, right? And then at the very, very bottom, you had slaves and natives. Now, this was the early social class system that they had around 1500, but it's a great example of how colonialism is beginning to die. Colonialism is beginning to die because it's also just uncontrollable. With population growth on the rise and people living longer lives, you just can't control colonial growth, taxation, monitoring of these people as it continues. You're just going to have to end up letting them go and letting them become their own countries. And this is what's called a pasta painting, and it was a big example of why it was becoming so hard to manage the colonies in Latin America, right? And the reason being is because this was a family of a mestizo who had then married into a Creole. So what do you call that family? If a mestizo woman married a Creole man, are you now only 1/4 mestizo? Where do they go in the social class system? What about if it's someone that was mestizo and native then mixed together and made themselves more native and less European? Where do they go in this whole system? What if a mestizo and a mulatto mixed together? Where do they go in this whole system? So it became very, 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 very uncontrollable. And the reason why it became even more uncontrollable was, of course, because your boy Napoleon invaded Spain in 1808, right? This is a part of his whole Peninsular Campaign, right? He took over Spain very, very swiftly and very easily, okay? However, he has to invade Spain in 1808 to try and then take back Portugal because they were violating his continental system, okay? This is part of his Peninsular Campaign. And when he removes the Spanish king, and puts, of course, his brother Ferdinand VII, or removes the Spanish king Ferdinand VII, and makes his brother Joseph king of Spain, as he would tended to do, because this is one of his conservative traits, right? The Creoles use this as a reason to revolutionize, right? To lead an independence movement. And in 1810, rebellions all over Latin America started breaking out, right? And speaking of, like, this is a very, very heavily documented in another one of our romantic pieces. This is actually Francisco Goya's executions of May 3rd, 1808, when Napoleon started invading Spain, right? These are suspected guerrilla agents of the Peninsular Campaign being drug out of a village and shot by Napoleonic troops right here. So a very, very romantic piece, full of a lot of emotion, right? Now, peril in Spain is going to lead directly to these revolutions because the Napoleonic Wars in Spain led to a huge withdrawal of Spanish forces. So since all these Spanish troops are being pulled out and sent to Europe to fight off Napoleon, that means, here's so messed up. There we go. That means that they have a little smaller number of people defending the colonies. So the Creoles use this as an opportunity to try and fight back, right? So in 1820, only 10,000 Spanish troops were left. There are a lot more Creoles than that. And the guy who wanted to lead these Creoles to their independence early on in northern South America, I know that sounds really ridiculous because it's northern South America, but I'm talking about the regions of Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Guyana, not northern Brazil, because that's all Amazon rainforest, Colombia, Panama, and I know some of you are like, Panama's in Central America. Calm down. But that whole area, this is their man, okay? His name is Simón Bolivar, right? Also, really, really quickly, extra credit opportunity. If one of y'all can tell me the intersection or street address where the Simón Bolivar statue is located in New Orleans, because there's a huge statue commemorating him in New Orleans, because there's also a lot of American, like, founding father statues in Latin America, but there is a Simón Bolivar statue in New Orleans. If you can tell me the street address in the comments below, if you're the first person from E or the first person from G to do that, extra credit on that test that's coming up next Friday, all right? So now, anyway, but he was also known as the Liberator because he was a Venezuelan-born Creole, right? He is Venezuelan, and he declares during all this melee, during all this hysteria while Napoleon's invading Spain, he declares Venezuela independent in 1811, okay? So in 1811, Bolivar's armies start preparing for battle. And they're very unsuccessful at first, right? They get driven all the way out of Venezuela, all the way over onto the other side of the Andes Mountains towards Peru, right? But in 1819, he acquired a huge army, and he marched over the Andes into modern-day Colombia, and he defeated the Spanish army there, okay? So then, in 1821, he declares Venezuela independent from Europe. And since this is still during the Napoleonic era, what did Napoleon do when he acquired the Louisiana territory? He sold it. What did Napoleon do when he started doing all these other crazy things? He let it go, right? Now, after he gets exiled the second time in 1815, Spain is left very weak and unable to fight these liberation movements. So what they ended up having to do in 1821, Venezuela becomes independent because of the efforts of Simón Bolivar, right? And then what he decides to do is he marches north to Ecuador, and he goes to meet another man by the name of José de San Martin. All right, so like now, José de San Martin is this guy. Notice I said Simón Bolivar led the independence movements inside of northern South America, the northern region. I'm going to throw a map up here too that you can definitely take a screenshot of so you can go ahead and look at that. But José de San Martin is a little bit different. He's a simple guy. He's very modest. He's born in Argentina, and he spent a lot of time in Spain as a military officer, so he's very formally trained, right? But he's a Creole all the same. He just happens to be a wealthy one. Now, José de San Martin decides that it's time to liberate the countries of Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, or not Bolivia. Guess who actually liberates Bolivia? Bolivar liberates Bolivia. That's why it's named directly after him. Simón Bolivar, Bolivia. See? All right, now, anyway, this right here, that is a statue of José de San Martin, and I believe it's in Buenos Aires. All right, so now, getting into it, though, Argentina is going to declare itself independent in 1816, right after Bolivar's early losses in his military campaigns, right? San Martin, though, leads a huge army across the Andes into Chile and joins up with one of the most ridiculously sounding named people that you don't need to know the test, but I always put him in here because I think he's funny sounding, Bernardo O'Higgins. All right, so his father was Irish and his mother was Spanish, and they had him, and Bernardo O'Higgins was then the product of said relationship. Now, what they're going to do together, though, they're going to free Argentina, and then they're going to free Chile, and then in 1822, they march towards Ecuador, and they meet up with Bolivar, and they decide how to remove the remaining Spanish forces from places like Lima, Peru, how they're going to get them out of Paraguay and Uruguay as well, right? So, going forward, though, San Martin ends up leaving Latin America, and he dies in France in 1850. This says dies in battle. Not true. Dies in France, in Paris in 1850, right? So San Martin was very successful liberating the southern regions of South America. I'm going to throw that map up here in about 2 seconds, okay? Bolivar is victorious at ridding most of Latin America of Spanish forces and establishing a new central Creole-run Latin American culture-based country at the very northern area. Now, I'm going to get into that in a second, but let's look at that map really quick, okay? But there we go. So all these areas right here were established by Bolivar, okay? You see Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, like this entire area, Panama, and the northern areas of Peru. San Martin, liberated this entire area in the south from Spanish forces. So Spain's now not involved in South America anymore, okay? So let me go ahead. There you go. So go ahead and take that screenshot right there. There you go. So Bolivar liberates the northern area. San Martin liberates the central and southern area. Some of you are like, what about Brazil? I'm not talking about every single Latin American independence movement. I don't have enough time. But this right here is the country that Bolivar established. It was known as Gran Colombia. Now, Gran Colombia had inside of it the modern-day countries of, let me make myself smaller, The modern day countries of Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, and Panama. There we go. Look how tiny I am. Now, anyway, so just a little squish. So short-lived, though, due to the fact of, like I was saying, what happens when these Latin American countries liberate themselves? Huge amounts of civil war, huge amounts of charismatic leaders coming in and out, which was known as this thing called Caudilloism. All right, so a caudillo, 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 yeah, I think that's how you spell it. A caudillo is like a warlord in a sense. He runs a small faction of armies or people loyal to him, and he can control them and their movements and what they do. And some very famous caudillos have existed throughout history. Jose de Santa Anna. Some people have said that Bolivar and San Martin are caudillos. A lot of different ones. There's a lot of other more present day ones that are super sketchy too. Like some people could argue Che Guevara. Some people could argue Fidel Castro. Right? Caudilloism is going to be the big reason why his liberated new Gran Colombia is just going to go, and it ends up dissolving. Because Bolivar resigns his leadership of, like, he was accused of being a dictator of Gran Colombia, and he ends up resigning his leadership under all these, to avoid going to war with all these caudillos. And in 1830, Bolivar's Gran Colombia gets divided up into Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Panama later splits from Colombia later on with U.S. assistance in 1903, right? Well, this is just a good example of the instability of these, like, liberation movements, right? And because of that instability, it's kind of a lot of the reasons why Latin America today still struggles economically, all right? So now getting into it, though, there's a bunch of other liberation movements. There's two particularly big ones that I'm not going to talk about because we just don't have time. Mexico and Brazil also then later liberate themselves as well, getting rid of all Spanish forces in the Western Hemisphere. And in U.S. history, you'll talk about this when you talk about the rise of Theodore Roosevelt and how he wanted Spain to just go away and stay over there. And one of the biggest examples of us finally banishing Spanish influence out was known as the Spanish-American War, all right? So there you go. Boom, that is the Latin American Independence movement. Go ahead and jot all that stuff down. I'll talk to you guys later. Y'all have a good one. Go bang out that Albert I.O. assignment. I know it's hard, but you're going to be okay. I'll talk to you guys later, all right? Y'all have a good one.